The gloves were my idea, not the leather ones, not the cute fingerless kind people wear to look artsy at coffee shops. I mean thin, fitted, skin-colored medical gloves that I bought in bulk from a pharmacy 2 towns over, so nobody at Harlow Prep would recognize me buying them. 12 pairs a week, every week, for 4 years. Because the last time I touched something without them, really touched something, skin to surface, no barrier, I saw a 47-year-old man crying in a parking garage over a divorce his wife didn't know he wanted yet. I was 9. It was his steering wheel. I still don't know his name. That's the thing about psychometry that nobody tells you in the fantasy novels. It's not glamorous. It's not a gift wrapped in gold light and destiny music. It's a Tuesday afternoon where you accidentally brush your hand against a stranger's coffee cup and suddenly you're drowning in someone else's grief while your hot chocolate goes cold. I learned to wear gloves. I learned to keep my hands to myself. I learned to smile like nothing was wrong. I got very good at all three. My name is Eli Calloway. I'm 20 years old, I'm an Omega, and I live in a house in Greenwich, Connecticut that has 14 rooms, a wine cellar I've never been allowed into, and 2 older brothers who love me so much it sometimes feels like suffocation wearing a bow tie. Nathaniel is 28. He's the oldest. He runs Calloway Group, real estate, private security, 3 shell companies I was never supposed to know about but found out about anyway, when I accidentally touched his briefcase handle freshman year of high school. He has a jaw that looks like it was carved specifically to intimidate people and a voice that makes grown men rearrange their schedules. He also cuts the crusts off my sandwiches when he thinks I'm not looking. So, complex man. Grayson is 25. He's the charming one, which is a polite way of saying he's the dangerous one who's learned to make danger look like a smile. He does something in acquisitions that nobody fully explains to me, and honestly, I've stopped asking. He drives too fast, laughs too loud, and once spent 40 minutes arguing with a barista about oat milk on my behalf because, and I quote, "My brother deserves correctly steamed milk, sir." And this is not a debate. I love them both, genuinely. In the honest, complicated way you love people who would burn the world down for you and somehow never notice that the smoke is getting in your lungs too. The morning it all started to unravel, I was late. Not a little late. Catastrophically, impressively, only Eli late. I had a 9 a.m. seminar at Whitmore University. 40 minutes from the estate on a good traffic day, 55 on a normal one, and apparently 110 on days when Nate decided the family driver needed to shadow me, and the backup car needed to be positioned at the campus entrance, and someone needed to call ahead to confirm the building's security cameras were functioning. I found out about the cameras thing that morning, by accident, the way I find out about most things. I was pulling on my gloves in the front hallway when Grayson's phone buzzed on the entry table. He'd left it face up. A message preview from a contact saved as Holloway Campus Detail read, "Perimeter confirmed. Whitmore North entrance covered. Your brother won't know we're there." I stood very still. Then I picked up my bag, walked to the kitchen, poured myself the last of the coffee, and said with complete calm, "Grayson, sweetheart, my brother, the person I have loved since you used to make me co-pilot your Power Wheels at age 4. Why is there a man named Holloway confirming a perimeter at my university?" Grayson didn't even flinch. He was eating toast. He took another bite. "Traffic's bad today. You should leave early." That's not an answer. It's a redirect. There's a difference. I stared at him. He smiled. It was the smile he used on business rivals and overly curious reporters, and apparently now on me, his Omega brother, who was standing in the kitchen in a Whitmore hoodie and color-matched gloves at 8:14 in the morning. "Gray, Eli, I will pour this coffee on your toast." "You wouldn't." I tilted the mug. He grabbed his plate. We looked at each other. This was our relationship distilled into its purest form. I left at 8:19, alone because I told him I was taking the campus shuttle and then took an Uber instead, which felt like a small revolution and probably would have given Nate a mild cardiac event if he'd known. The morning was cold, that specific Connecticut cold that bites at the back of your neck, even through a scarf. And the trees along the Merritt Parkway were doing that early November thing where they look like they're bleeding rust and gold. I watched them through the window and thought about the phone message. about Holloway, about perimeters, about the fact that I had lived in that house for 20 years and still didn't fully know what my brothers were protecting me from, or if they were the thing I needed protection from. The thoughts sat in my chest the whole ride over. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and persistent, the way a splinter feels when you press down on it wrong. I kept replaying the message preview in my mind. Your brother won't know we're there. 7 words. Casual. Like it was routine. Like Holloway and Grayson had done this enough times that it didn't even need explaining anymore. Which meant this wasn't new. Which meant I had been walking around Whitmore University for 2 years, thinking I had a normal college experience, while my brothers had a man named Holloway confirming perimeters. I pressed my forehead against the cold Uber window and stared at the passing trees. You okay back there? The driver asked. His name was Marcus, according to the app. He had one of those pine tree air fresheners hanging from the mirror and a talk radio station playing low. Perfectly fine, I said, just reconsidering my entire life. He nodded like that was a normal answer. I respected him for it. Whitmore's campus in November looked like someone had hired a photographer to make Connecticut feel important. Red brick buildings, one of old iron lampposts, a quad covered in leaves that the groundskeeping staff raked every morning and the wind undid by noon. I had genuinely loved this place the first time I saw it. Still did, mostly. It felt like somewhere a person could breathe without someone scheduling the exhale. I paid Marcus, pulled my bag over my shoulder, and walked toward the north entrance of Harrow Hall. I did not look for Holloway. I absolutely looked for Holloway. I didn't find him, which was either reassuring or deeply concerning depending on how good he was at his job. Based on the fact that he was employed by Grayson Calloway, I was going to assume the latter and feel worse about it. The seminar was comparative PAC law. 40 students, one professor who wore bow ties unironically and meant it, and 2 hours of discussing territorial rights and Omega legislative history in the continental United States. I loved it. I was one of maybe 4 Omegas in the room, which was either a commentary on enrollment bias or the fact that most Omegas at Whitmore took the lighter elective tracks. I had opinions about that, but I saved them for my journal because Professor Aldridge already thought I was a handful, and I didn't need to prove him right before midterms. I sat in my usual seat, 3rd row from the front, left side. I pulled out my laptop. I arranged my gloves neatly on the desk beside me because I always took them off to type. The person next to me slid into his seat 2 minutes after I did and dropped a stack of printed case files onto the desk, with the particular chaos of someone who had clearly been running. Sorry, he said, slightly breathless. Parking. It's fine, I said without looking up. We haven't started. Right, good, he exhaled. Then a beat later, you're Eli Calloway. I looked up. He was maybe 22, sandy brown hair, the kind that looked like it couldn't decide between curly and straight and had given up trying. Sharp green eyes, a jacket that had Whitmore Law printed on the chest, and a coffee stain near the left cuff that he either hadn't noticed or had decided to live with. His scent reached me a second after I registered his face. Something like cedar in cold rain, clean and a little restless. Alpha, unmistakably. I am, I said. And you are. Declan Frost. He said it like it should mean something. When it clearly didn't, he adjusted. I'm in the Thursday section usually. I switched today because of a conflict. Okay, I said. Welcome to Tuesday. He blinked. Then he almost smiled. Thanks. I went back to my laptop. He settled into his seat. Aldridge started talking about the 1987 Omega Reclassification Act, and I let myself get absorbed in it, the way I always did when the subject actually mattered. I managed to forget about Declan Frost for approximately 11 minutes. Then his elbow bumped mine, reaching for his pen, and his bare forearm grazed the back of my ungloved hand. Contact, skin to skin. Less than a second, it hit me like a current. Not pain. It never felt like pain exactly. More like being pulled sideways out of your own body and dropped into a film reel that belonged to someone else. Flashes, not full scenes. Emotion first, image second. Fear, sharp and specific. A hallway. Fluorescent lighting. Someone's voice saying, You need to walk away from this, Frost. I'm not asking. And then, clear as anything, a face I recognized. Nathaniel. My brother's face, in Declan Frost's memory, hard-jawed and cold in a way I had seen him be with business rivals and people who disappointed him. Not with strangers, not with someone who should have no reason to know him at all. Then it cut, like someone yanked the reel. I was back in my seat. Aldridge was mid-sentence about territorial jurisdiction. My hand was flat on the desk, and my heart was doing something uneven and alarmed in my chest. I did not look at Declan. I put my glove back on, slowly, carefully, the way you move when you don't want anyone to notice you're shaking. Nathaniel's face in this stranger's memory, not a passing thing, not a background blur, ear front and center, sharp, with the emotional texture of a threat attached to it. I wrote one line in my notebook that had nothing to do with pack law. Who is Declan Frost and why does my brother want him gone? I made it through the rest of seminar on autopilot, nodded at the right times, typed notes that probably made sense. When Aldridge dismissed us, I was already closing my laptop, already calculating, already running through everything I knew about Nate's business contacts versus everything I didn't know, which was, as established, considerably more. Declan packed up beside me without speaking. I appreciated that. I was not in the emotional space for casual conversation with a man whose memories had just rearranged my morning. He stood, I stood. We both moved toward the aisle, and then he said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. Your brothers know I'm in this class, by the way. I stopped. He didn't. He kept walking, unhurried, toward the door, coffee-stained jacket and all. I stood in the third row of comparative pack law and stared at the back of his head and felt the splinter press deeper. Your brothers know I'm in this class. Not I know your brothers. Not we've met. Past tense awareness, surveillance awareness, the specific phrasing of someone who understood he was being watched and had chosen, deliberately, to sit next to me anyway. I had two options. I could call Grayson, report back like the carefully monitored Omega they apparently believed I was, complete the circuit, let them handle it. Or I could follow Declan Frost across campus and find out what my brothers didn't want me to know. I picked up my bag. I followed him. I want to be clear that I am not a stalker. I am a curious Omega with boundary issues that were directly caused by two overprotective alpha brothers who apparently have surveillance assets stationed at my university. The distinction matters. Morally. To me. Right now. As I trailed Declan Frost across the Whitmore quad at a distance, I felt was reasonable, and he probably would have found unsettling if he'd turned around. He didn't turn around. He walked like someone who had already accounted for the possibility of being followed and had made peace with it. Steady pace, hands in his jacket pockets. He took the path that curved behind the law library rather than the main walkway, which told me two things. One, he knew this campus well enough to use the back roads. Two, he was either avoiding cameras or avoiding people. Given what I now knew about Holloway and his confirmed perimeters, I was going to guess cameras. The cold had sharpened since morning. My breath came out in small clouds, and the leaves under my boots were frozen stiff, which made stealth approximately impossible. Every step I took sounded like I was aggressively eating cereal. Declan had to hear me. He gave no indication that he did. We passed the law library, past the little stone bench where I usually ate lunch when the weather was above 40 degrees. He turned left toward the smaller building at the edge of the academic quad, the one that housed graduate offices and smelled permanently of old paper and radiator heat. He held the door open without looking back. I stopped. He stood there, hand on the door, staring straight ahead at the hallway inside. You've been behind me since the quad exit, he said. You walk loud. These are frozen leaves, I said. They're loud by nature. Don't blame me. He finally looked back. There was something in his expression that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite tension. It lived in the space between the two, careful and assessing. You actually followed me. You said something designed to make me follow you and then walked away. That's called a lure, Declan. You don't get to be surprised by the fish. Something shifted in his face. Not a smile exactly. More like the beginning of one that he caught before it finished. He stepped back and held the door wider. I walked in. The hallway was narrow and warm, and smelled exactly like I expected. Old paper. Radiator heat. Someone's leftover lunch from a microwave 2 floors up. Declan led me to a small study room off the main corridor, the kind with a glass window panel that grad students booked for group sessions. He checked both ways down the hall before stepping inside. I noted that, filed it. The room had a round table, 4 chairs, and a whiteboard with someone's half-erased constitutional theory notes. I sat down without being invited because I felt like making a point about who was in control of this interaction. Declan remained standing for a moment, then seemed to decide something, and sat across from me. We looked at each other. He had a careful face, the kind that had learned to give very little away, but wasn't quite practiced enough to hide everything. There was something behind his green eyes that I would have called worry if I'd known him better. "How much do you actually know about what your brothers do?" he asked. "Good morning to you too," I said. "And enough. Why?" "That's not an answer." "Neither was yours this morning when I asked who you were. We're even." He exhaled through his nose, looked at the whiteboard, looked back at me. "I'm a third-year law student. I'm also doing a research placement with the Connecticut PAC Oversight Committee. We investigate PAC leaders who abuse hierarchical authority." I kept my face neutral. "Okay. Calloway Group has been under quiet review for 8 months. The room felt smaller suddenly. The radiator ticked. I kept my hands flat on the table, gloved still, and I looked at Declan Frost with the particular expression I had developed over years of receiving information I didn't want while surrounded by people I loved. "What kind of review?" I said. It wasn't a question. It came out too flat for that. "Territorial acquisition through suppression contracts." He said it carefully, like he'd rehearsed the phrasing. "There are 3 Omega families in the Fairfield County Territory who signed documents relinquishing PAC rights under what we believe were coerced conditions. Calloway Group handled the acquisition of their properties within 60 days of each signing." I stared at him. He continued. "Your brother Nathaniel met with our lead investigator 4 months ago, privately, off record. 2 weeks after that meeting, the investigator transferred out of state, voluntarily, go on paper." "On paper," I repeated. "On paper." The radiator ticked again. Outside the glass panel, a student walked past with a backpack and headphones, completely unbothered, existing in a world where this conversation was not happening. I thought about Nathaniel cutting the crusts off my sandwiches. I thought about "your brother won't know we're there." I thought about the way Grayson had smiled over his toast this morning, like everything was fine, like everything was always fine, like the word fine was a house they had built specifically to keep me inside. "Why are you telling me this?" I said. Declan leaned forward slightly. "Because you're the one person in that family who isn't on their payroll. And because I think you already know something is wrong. I think you've known for a while." I didn't answer that. Mostly because he was right, and I had no interest in confirming it out loud to a stranger in a graduate study room, while my heart was doing something complicated and unhappy in my chest. "What do you want from me?" I said instead. "Nothing." He said it simply. "I'm not asking you to spy on your brothers. I'm not asking you to hand over documents or wear a wire, or any of the things you're probably already imagining." He paused. "I just thought you deserved to know what kind of water you're swimming in." I looked at him for a long moment, long enough to make him slightly uncomfortable, which was intentional. "That's a very generous explanation," I said, "for someone who specifically switched seminar sections to sit next to me." His jaw tightened. "Barely," I caught it. "You did your research before today," I continued. You knew my schedule. You knew the seating layout. You chose the elbow bump. Don't perform altruism for me, Declan. I grew up watching 2 alphas perform it professionally. I have a very good eye." The silence that followed was a specific kind. Not angry, not defensive. More like the silence of someone recalibrating because the situation turned out to be different from what they expected. "You're right," he said finally. "I did research you before today. Thank you. But what I told you is true." "I believe that too," I said. "Both things can be true. That's what makes it interesting." I stood up, smoothed my jacket, picked up my bag. Declan watched me with that unfinished expression, the one caught between something and something else. "I'm not going to help you build a case against my brothers," I said. Just so that's clear up front." But I'm also not going to pretend this conversation didn't happen. I looked at him directly. If what you're saying is real, then the people being hurt are omegas, and that matters to me regardless of who's responsible. I moved toward the door. My hand touched the handle even through the glove, and I felt nothing. Just metal. Just cold. For once I was glad my power had nothing to show me. I pulled the door open and looked back once. Same section Thursday? I asked. Declan blinked. What? Comparative pack law? Thursday section. Are you switching back or staying Tuesday? He stared at me like I was a puzzle that had just added more pieces. I haven't decided. Decide, I said. Either way, I'll know which one means you're still watching me. I walked out into the hallway before he could answer. The frozen leaves outside were going to be a problem on the way back. But honestly, after everything that had just happened in that room, serial loud footsteps felt like the least of my concerns. My brothers were under investigation, and I had just had a conversation with the person doing the investigating. And I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do about either of those facts except go home, look Nathaniel directly in the eye over dinner, and see if I could feel the lie from across the table without touching anything at all. The ride home was quieter than the ride out. Same Merritt Parkway, same rust and gold trees bleeding into the gray afternoon sky. Different Uber driver, this one silent and unbothered, which I appreciated because I was not in the condition for small talk. Or I was in the condition for staring out the window and running the same 4 sentences through my head on a loop until they wore grooves. Territorial acquisition through suppression contracts. 3 Omega families. The investigator transferred out of state, voluntarily on paper. I pressed 2 fingers against my temple and breathed through my nose slowly. A technique I had developed in middle school when the psychometry got loud and I needed to separate what was mine from what wasn't. It worked for psychic noise. It worked slightly less well for the regular kind, the kind that came from your own head because reality had decided to be aggressively inconvenient. My brothers were not perfect people. I knew that. I had always known that. Well, you don't grow up in the Calloway house without understanding that Nathaniel's version of protection and the dictionary's version were not always the same document. But there was a wide canyon between overprotective and coercing Omega families out of their pack rights. Wide enough that I had never looked across it before today. The question was whether I was looking at it now because it was real or because Declan Frost was very convincing and I had touched his arm by accident and caught one fragmented memory that I was currently building a cathedral of suspicion on top of. I was self-aware enough to know that was possible. I was also self-aware enough to know that I had been ignoring the edges of things for a long time because ignoring them was easier than pulling the thread. The thread was right there now, visible, fraying. Yeah, I didn't pull it yet, but I also didn't look away. The estate came into view at 3:47 p.m. It looked the way it always looked in November, grand and a little severe, the kind of house that had opinions about you before you walked in. The iron gate opened automatically as the Uber pulled up, which meant the sensor had logged the plates and someone inside already knew I was home. I tipped the driver 20%, got out, and stood in the cold driveway for exactly 4 seconds longer than necessary. Then I squared my shoulders, arranged my face into the particular expression I thought of as normal Eli, and walked inside. The house smelled like rosemary and roasting garlic. Grayson cooked when he was processing something. It was one of the more useful tells he had. When business was smooth and life was uncomplicated, he ordered from the Italian place on Greenwich Avenue and called it delegation. When something was sitting heavy on him, he cooked from scratch with the focused intensity of a man diffusing a device. Rosemary and garlic from the front hallway meant tonight was a scratch night. I deposited my bag on the entry bench, hung up my coat, and followed the smell to the kitchen. Grayson was at the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbows, handling a pan of chicken thighs with the kind of concentration he usually reserved for contracts. Nathaniel was at the kitchen island with a glass of water in his laptop, reading something that made his jaw do the tight thing it did when numbers weren't behaving. They both looked up when I walked in. "Hey," Grayson said. Easy, warm, a smile that reached his eyes without trying. "Hey," Nathaniel said. It was slightly less easy but genuine in its own contained way. "Hello," I said pleasantly. "Normal family, normal kitchen. Everything is fine." Grayson squinted at me. "Why did that sound like a threat?" It didn't. That's your guilty conscience talking. Nathaniel closed his laptop an inch. How was seminar? Educational, I said. I pulled out a stool at the island and sat down across from him. We covered the 1987 Omega Reclassification Act. Fascinating stuff. All about how PAC authorities were restructured to prevent territorial abuse. I smiled at him. Really made me think. Nathaniel looked at me with the steady, unreadable expression that had probably made boardrooms very uncomfortable over the years. Good, he said. Wasn't it? I agreed. We looked at each other. A beat too long. Grayson stirred something. The pan hissed. Plates are in the cabinet, Grayson said to no one in particular, which was what he always said when he sensed tension and wanted to dissolve it through the universal language of task assignment. I got the plates. Dinner was almost normal. That was the thing about my brothers. They were very good at almost. The table was set. The food was genuinely excellent. The conversation moved through safe topics the way it always did. Grayson's ongoing argument with his acquisitions team, Nathaniel's meeting schedule for the week, my seminar workload, the possibility of getting the East Wing's heating looked at before December. I participated. I laughed at the right moments. I ate 2 helpings because the chicken was objectively excellent, and I was not going to let existential dread ruin a good meal. But I watched them. Not in an obvious way. In the quiet, peripheral way I had learned to watch people when my gloves were on and my power was offline, and all I had was regular human observation to work with. The way Nathaniel checked his phone twice and turned it face down both times. The way Grayson refilled his water glass more than he usually did, which he only did when his hands needed something to do. The way they both, without appearing to coordinate it, kept the conversation angled away from anything that touched on work in any meaningful depth. They were performing normal too. That was the part that settled into my chest like a stone. Not that they were hiding something. I had suspected that in a general sense for years, the way you suspect weather is coming before the sky actually changes. What settled hard and heavy was the specific recognition that they were performing for me. That this table, this dinner, this careful, warm normalcy was something they constructed around me like a set. I put my fork down. Gray, I said, when did you hire Holloway? The table went quiet. Not dramatically. Not with a gasp or a clatter. The quiet was worse than that. It was the quiet of 2 people who had prepared for this conversation and were now deciding which version of it to have. Grayson set his glass down. Nathaniel looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read, which was unusual because I could usually read him through the gloves just fine. Some people leaked emotion into objects without knowing it. Nathaniel had always been careful. Now I wondered why. Narn, he's part of the residential security team, Nathaniel said. Even. Measured. We expanded the detail earlier this year to cover my university campus. As a precaution, against what? I said. Another pause. Grayson looked at Nathaniel. It was a fast look, a half-second thing, but I had been cataloging their silent conversations for 20 years, and I read it clearly enough. How much do we tell him? The answer Nathaniel's expression sent back was equally clear. Not yet. Something hot moved through my chest. Not quite anger, not quite hurt. The specific feeling of being managed by people who loved you, which was its own particular kind of ache because you couldn't even be fully furious about it. The love was real. That was what made it complicated. That was what made it unbearable. When there have been some credible threats against the family, Nathaniel said carefully. PAC politics. Nothing you need to worry about directly. We expanded security as a standard response. PAC politics, I repeated. Yes. Credible threats. Eli. I'm just repeating the words back so I understand them correctly, I said. PAC politics. Credible threats. Holloway confirming perimeters at my university campus. Nothing to worry about. I looked at him steadily. That's a lot of nothing. Nathaniel held my gaze. His jaw was doing the thing. We're handling it. I know you are, I said. That's actually what concerns me. The silence after that was longer. Grayson was very still, which for Grayson, who was constitutionally incapable of stillness, was its own kind of answer. On the candle in the center of the table flickered from the heating vent. Outside the dining room window, the Connecticut dark had come down full and complete. The yard just shapes and shadows. I picked my fork back up. The chicken is really good, I said. Grayson exhaled. Time makes the difference. Most people skip it. Most people are wrong, I said. Nathaniel watched me for one more moment. Then he opened his laptop again. Dinner continued. Almost normal. The way it always was. But something had shifted. Quietly, irreversibly. Like a floorboard that had always been slightly loose finally giving under your weight at 2 in the morning. I knew it. They knew I knew it. And none of us said another word about it for the rest of the night. I washed my own dishes that night. Not because it was my turn. Not because anyone asked. I just needed something to do with my hands that wasn't thinking. And hot water and dish soap was about the most aggressively normal activity available to me at 9:15 on a Tuesday night in a house that was starting to feel like a question I didn't know how to answer. Nathaniel had gone to his office. I heard the door close down the hall, that specific soft click that meant he was done being a brother for the night and had returned to being whatever else he was. Grayson had cleaned the stove, wrapped the leftovers, and disappeared upstairs with his phone pressed to his ear, voice too low to catch words, which was fine. I wasn't trying to catch them. Not yet. I dried the last plate and stood at the kitchen window for a moment. The backyard was dark. The old oak at the property line was just a shape against a darker shape, white bare branches reaching up like they were asking the sky something. I had climbed that tree when I was 7 and gotten stuck and cried for 20 minutes before Grayson climbed up after me and got stuck too. And then we had both cried until Nathaniel came out, looked up at us and said, "You're 4 feet off the ground," in the driest voice imaginable. We climbed down immediately, embarrassed, laughing. I had loved them so easily then. I still love them now. That was the problem. Love didn't have an off switch just because someone handed you a reason to be afraid of it. I put the plate away and left the kitchen. My room was on the second floor, east side of the house, which meant morning light and the sound of the neighbor's dog at 6 a.m., and a window seat I had claimed at age 10 and never relinquished. I had done most of my important thinking in that window seat over the years. Homework, college applications, the ongoing project of figuring out what kind of person I was underneath the gloves and the careful smiles and the practiced normalcy. I sat there now, knees pulled up, looking out at the dark front yard. My phone had 3 notifications, 2 from my group project partners in PAC Law about the midterm presentation, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize, sent 40 minutes ago. I opened it. Thursday section, in case you wanted to know which one it means. No name, but I didn't need one. I stared at Declan Frost's text for a long moment. He had switched to Thursday, which by my own stated logic meant he was still watching me. He had essentially just confirmed it and sent me a notification about it. I typed back, "That's either very honest or very stupid." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Little of both. How was dinner? I looked at my phone, then at the dark yard, then back at my phone. Informative, I typed. You were right about the water. A pause. Longer this time. I'm sorry, I didn't answer that. Not because I didn't believe him, but because sorry was a complicated word, and I wasn't ready to decide what to do with it yet. I put my phone face down on the window seat cushion and pressed my back against the cold glass and thought about Nathaniel's face at dinner. Measured, careful, the face of a man managing information. I thought about the 3 Omega families. I thought about the investigator who transferred out of state, voluntarily on paper. I thought about the fact that my power had shown me Nathaniel's face in Declan's memory, wrapped in the specific emotional texture of a threat, and how I had been telling myself for 2 hours that memory was fragmentary and context-dependent, and maybe I had misread it. I had not misread it. I was good at a lot of things. Misreading psychometric impressions was not one of them. I looked at the window seat cushion. It was old, navy blue, slightly faded on the left side, where the morning sun hit it. I had sat on it so many times that the shape of me was worn into the foam underneath. Under the cushion, where it had been since I was 16 and needed somewhere safe to hide things, was a small lockbox. Inside the lockbox was a notebook, a spare suppressor patch, $40 in cash that I rotated out annually, and a pair of thin nitrile gloves, backup for the backup. I had put those things there at 16 because 16-year-old me had understood, in the quiet, wordless way children understand things before they have language for them, that there might come a day when I needed to leave quickly and think clearly. I had hoped that day would never come. I was starting to update that position. I did not go through Nathaniel's office that night. I want to be clear about that. I thought about it. The thought was loud and specific and had a detailed plan attached to it, involving the spare key on the hook inside the linen closet and the particular cabinet on the left side of his desk where he kept physical files. I knew that cabinet existed because I had seen it in a dozen psychometric flashes over the years, from doorknobs and chair backs, and once, memorably, the pen he left on the kitchen counter that had shown me 30 seconds of an argument with someone whose face I couldn't see. I did not go, because going meant crossing a line that I could not uncross, and I was not ready to do that on the basis of one conversation with a law student and a dinner table silence. I needed more than a feeling, even when the feeling was mine. So instead, I lay in bed with the lights off and stared at the ceiling and did the thing I called running the tape, which was where I replayed every psychometric impression I had ever caught from objects in this house, and tried to see if the pieces arranged differently now that I had new information. The briefcase handle, freshman year of high school. 3 shell companies. That one I had filed under Calloway Group is complicated and left alone. A business card I touched by mistake in Grayson's jacket pocket 2 years ago. A woman's voice saying, "The timeline needs to move up," and a feeling of pressure, urgency, something slightly frantic underneath Grayson's usual smoothness. The front door handle, 6 months ago. Someone else's hand on it before mine. Someone who stood outside for a full minute before leaving without knocking, and the emotional residue they left was fear. Not Calloway fear, outside fear. The fear of someone who wanted to come in and had decided it wasn't safe. I had filed that one under security concern, asked Nate. I had not asked Nate. I was filing it differently now. The ceiling had nothing helpful to add. I stared at it anyway. At some point I heard Nathaniel's office door open. His footsteps in the hall, unhurried and even. They paused outside my door. I closed my eyes, kept my breathing slow. Not because I was pretending to sleep, but because I needed a second before whatever came next. He knocked once, soft, the way he had since I was small, one quiet knock that said, "I know you're probably awake, but I'll give you the choice." I had always loved that about him. It was the kind of small consideration that made the larger complications so much harder to hold. "Yeah," I said. The door opened. He didn't come in fully, just stood in the doorway, the way he did when he had something to say and hadn't finished deciding how to say it. The hall light outlined him, broad-shouldered and still, with the same shape that had meant safety to me for 20 years. "I know dinner was weird, Hassan," he said. "Dinner was great," I said. "Gray's chicken is legitimately excellent." "Eli, Nathaniel," a beat. I heard him exhale quietly. "The security expansion is real. The threat context is real. I need you to trust me that we have it handled." I looked at the ceiling. "I trust that you believe that." Another pause. Longer. "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed. "It's not." The silence between us was the most honest thing we had said to each other all evening. He stood in the doorway, and I lay in the dark, and the house settled around us with its old wood sounds. And for a moment we were just two people who loved each other, trying to figure out how much of the truth the love could hold. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "You too," I said. The door closed. His footsteps moved away down the hall. I put one gloved hand flat against the mattress and stared at the dark ceiling and thought about 3 Omega families and a cabinet full of physical files, and a man named Holloway who confirmed perimeters for a living. Then I thought about Declan Frost saying, "I'm sorry," and meaning it. Tomorrow I had no morning class. Tomorrow I had time. And I was starting to think that the cabinet on the left side of Nathaniel's desk was not going to stay unopened for very much longer. I gave myself until 6 a.m. to change my mind. 6 a.m. came. I did not change my mind. I lay there for another 12 minutes anyway, staring at the ceiling, giving the more reasonable part of my brain one final opportunity to make a compelling argument. It tried. It said things like you don't have full context, and one conversation with a stranger is not evidence, and what if you find something you can't unknow? That last one was the most honest. I sat up anyway. The house was quiet in the specific way it got before 7, that held breath stillness where even the heating system seemed to be taking its time. I knew Nathaniel's schedule by heart, the way you know the rhythm of a house you grew up in. He ran at 6:30, 45 minutes, same route through the neighborhood, every morning except Sunday. Grayson slept until 8 unless he had an early call, and his early calls always announced themselves the night before through the appearance of his laptop on the kitchen counter and a fresh pot of coffee preset on a timer. No laptop on the counter last night, no coffee timer. Miss Grayson was asleep. Nathaniel would leave in 20 minutes. I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt and socks, and stood at my door listening to the house breathe. Down the hall, the faint sound of Nathaniel's room, drawers, the soft percussion of a man getting ready for a run. I waited. The sound of his door, his footsteps on the stairs, light and even. The front door opening and closing with a click that echoed once and disappeared. Silence. I counted to 60. Slow. All the way through. Then I went to the linen closet, reached behind the second shelf, and took the spare key off its hook. Nathaniel's office was the kind of room that reflected him exactly. Clean, ordered, nothing left out that didn't need to be there. Dark wood desk, 2 monitors, a bookshelf that held actual reference books and actual files and actual labeled binders, which was almost aggressively analog for a man who ran a company with 3 shell subsidiaries. The blinds were half open, letting in the gray early light in long, pale strips across the floor. I stood in the doorway for a moment. This was the line, right here. The carpet at the threshold of his office at 6:41 in the morning, with a spare key in my hand, and 4 years of carefully managed not knowing behind me. I stepped in. The room smelled like him, cedar and something faintly chemical. The hand cream he used in winter, and underneath it the particular scent of an alpha in full dominance position. The invisible territorial marker that objects in his space absorbed over time. Most people couldn't detect it consciously. I always could. Not because of the psychometry, and it was just because he was my brother and I had been reading his scent since I was small enough to fall asleep against his shoulder. It made what I was doing feel worse, and I did it anyway. I went to the cabinet on the left side of the desk. It was locked. Of course it was locked. I stood there looking at it and almost laughed at myself because what had I expected? A gift bow and an explanatory note. I did not have the key to this cabinet. What I did have, after a moment of staring, was the memory of Grayson sitting in this office 3 years ago, leaning back in the desk chair with his feet up, complaining about quarterly reports while Nathaniel ignored him. I had brought them both coffee. I had set Grayson's mug on the desk. When I picked up the mug afterward, my bare fingertip had grazed the desk surface. And I had caught 2 seconds of Nathaniel opening that cabinet. He pressed the underside of the second drawer up before he turned the key. A release mechanism. Old houses, old furniture, old tricks. I crouched down, pressed the underside of the second drawer up with my palm. Something clicked. The cabinet opened. I sat very still for a moment on the office floor in my socks and sweatshirt and thought about the version of my life where I had not just successfully broken into my brother's locked cabinet using a psychometric memory from 3 years ago. That version seemed peaceful, uncomplicated, blissfully uninformed. I reached inside. The files were organized by territory, color-coded tabs, Nathaniel's handwriting on the labels, precise and small the way it always was, when the handwriting of someone who had learned early that legibility was a form of control. Fairfield County sat at the front. I pulled it out and set it on the floor and opened it with my gloved hands. The first document was a property acquisition agreement, standard format, the kind I had seen in PAC law readings, seller signature at the bottom, Calloway Group representative signature above it. The date was 14 months ago. The seller's name was printed clearly at the top. Marcus Vega, Omega, registered Fairfield County PAC member. I turned the page. The second document was a supplementary agreement, smaller print, a clause toward the bottom, section 4.7, that I read 3 times because the first 2 times I thought I was misreading it. Section 4.7 stated that in exchange for the agreed acquisition price, DeMarcus Vega relinquished all future claim to Fairfield County PAC territory and waived the right to petition for PAC reassignment for a period of 10 years. 10 years. An Omega cutoff from PAC reassignment for 10 years was an Omega without a safety net, without the legal right to seek a new PAC's protection if his situation became unsafe, without the territorial backing that every registered PAC Omega was legally entitled to under the 1987 Reclassification Act, the same act I had been sitting in seminar discussing yesterday morning. I turned another page. A second agreement, different name. Jordan Ashby, Omega, same clause. Section 4.7, same 10-year waiver. I turned again. Riley Park, Omega. Section 4.7, 3 names, 3 waivers, all signed. All dated within the last 18 months. Now all processed through Calloway Group's acquisition arm. I sat on the floor of my brother's office in the pale gray morning light and felt the specific cold of something you have been not knowing for a long time, finally becoming something you know. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that. I had expected them to shake and they weren't, which told me something about the part of me that had already been preparing for this without my conscious permission. I took my phone out of my sweatshirt pocket. I photographed each document. Systematic, clear. All 3 agreements, both sides of each page. Then I put the file back exactly where it had been, closed the cabinet, pressed the release mechanism back into place, and stood up. I was almost at the door when I stopped. There was a 4th file behind the Fairfield County folder. Thinner. Or no color tab. Just Nathaniel's handwriting on the label in smaller letters than usual, which was how I knew it was the one he least wanted found. The label said one word: Eli. I stood with my back to the cabinet and my hand on the door frame and stared at the opposite wall for 4 full seconds. Then I turned around, went back, opened the cabinet again, pulled out the thin file. Inside was a single document, 2 pages, a medical report header at the top from a specialist clinic in New Haven, dated 8 years ago, when I was 12. I read the first paragraph, then I read it again. My psychometry was documented in this report, described in clinical language as anomalous scent-responsive ability with confirmed object reading capacity. There were test results, controlled conditions, a list of objects I had been given to read, and what I had reported seeing. I had no memory of any of this. I read further. At the bottom of the second page, in the recommendations section, a single highlighted line. Given the sensitivity and rarity of subject's ability, continued monitoring is advised. Exposure of ability to outside PAC or governmental bodies poses significant risk to subject and family. Recommend information control maintained by PAC authority. PAC authority. Nathaniel's signature was at the bottom of the page, as my PAC authority, as the alpha who had authorized this assessment, when I was 12, without telling me. I put the file back, closed the cabinet, put the release mechanism back, walked out of the office, locked the door, returned the key to the linen closet, walked to my room, sat on the window seat, looked at the bare oak tree in the front yard. The dog next door was barking at something. A car started somewhere down the street. The house was still quiet, Grayson still asleep, Nathaniel still running his 45-minute route through the neighborhood. I thought about the medical report. I thought about 8 years of wearing gloves and thinking it was my own private solution to my own private situation. 8 years of believing I had managed this alone, quietly without anyone knowing. They had known since I was 12. They had known and they had not told me. They had watched me figure out my own workaround and said nothing. Smiled at dinner and said nothing. Cut the crusts off my sandwiches and confirmed perimeters at my university and said absolutely nothing. And I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window. Outside at the end of the driveway, Nathaniel appeared at the top of the street. Running. Steady pace. His breath came out in clouds in the cold air, and he moved with the particular ease of someone who had done this route so many times, his body knew it without being told. He looked, from here, exactly like my brother. He was my brother. Both of those things were true, and neither of them solved anything. My phone buzzed. A text from Declan Frost. You don't have to tell me anything, but if you need to talk to someone who isn't them, I'm around. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I looked at Nathaniel turning into the driveway below, slowing to a walk, hands on his hips, head tilted back slightly the way he did when he was cooling down. I typed back to Declan, "Are you free this morning?" The response came in under 10 seconds. "Yes, where?" I thought about it for exactly one breath. Not campus. Somewhere they don't have cameras. Another pause, then, "I know a place. Coffee shop in Cos Cob. Local, no pack affiliation. I'll send you the address." I put my phone in my sweatshirt pocket and watched Nathaniel disappear through the front door below. The house absorbed him back into itself, back into the warmth and the order and the careful construction of everything being fine. I sat in the window seat and thought about a 12-year-old boy being assessed in a clinic in New Haven without knowing it. Then I thought about the fact that whatever my brothers were protecting me from, they had also been the ones deciding what I was allowed to know about myself. And that right there was where love stopped being simple. That was where it got complicated enough to hurt. The coffee shop was called Birch and Common. Small place, the kind that had mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu and genuinely good espresso and zero televisions, which meant the clientele came specifically to sit and think rather than to be distracted from it. It was on a side street 2 blocks off the main road in Cos Cob, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookshop that looked like it had not changed its window display since 2009. No pack insignia on the door, no territory marker in the window. Neutral ground in the most ordinary possible way. I got there first, ordered a cortado, took the table in the back corner with sight lines to both the entrance and the side hallway, and sat down. Then I took a breath and acknowledged to myself that I had just instinctively chosen a table with maximum visibility and 2 exit options, which was either a sign of healthy situational awareness or evidence that growing up in the Calloway house had given me the tactical instincts of a man twice my age. Probably both. Declan arrived 4 minutes later. He was wearing a different jacket today, darker, and he had clearly taken slightly more care with his appearance than yesterday, which I noted and filed under interesting but not actionable. He spotted me immediately, navigated the mismatched chairs without bumping any of them, and sat down across from me with the focused economy of someone who had been briefed by his own anxiety about how this meeting might go. He looked at my cortado. "Ew, that's a small coffee." "It's a concentrated coffee," I said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "It's the same principle as what I said yesterday about redirects and answers. Precision matters." He almost smiled. He ordered a regular drip coffee from the server who appeared at his elbow, and then he folded his hands on the table and looked at me and waited. I appreciated that. The waiting. Most people filled silence reflexively, the way you cover a scratch on a wall with a picture frame. Declan sat inside the silence like it was a room he was comfortable in. I went through his office and I said, he did not react with surprise, which told me he had already suspected I would. "What did you find?" he said. Quiet, careful. 3 acquisition agreements. Fairfield County. All Omega sellers. So all with a Section 4.7 clause that waived pack reassignment rights for 10 years. I watched his face as I said it. His jaw tightened slightly. "You already knew about Section 4.7. "We suspected it existed," he said. "We didn't have documentation." I photographed all 3. He went very still. The coffee shop moved around us, a couple near the window sharing a muffin, the espresso machine doing its thing, someone's laptop playing low music through headphones. All of it completely indifferent to the fact that I had just handed a pack oversight investigator the documentation he had been building toward for 8 months. "Eli," Declan said carefully. "I know," I said. "Sir, that could be considered unauthorized access to private documents belonging to a pack authority." "I know that too. Which means if this goes to a formal investigation, you could be called as a source, your method of obtaining the files could be scrutinized, and your brothers would know immediately that it was you." "Declan." I set my cortado down. "I am aware of all of those things. I did it anyway. What I need from you right now is not a legal disclaimer. I need you to tell me what those three Omega families lost when they signed those waivers, and whether your committee can actually do anything about it. He looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that was doing several calculations at once. The 10-year waiver means they can't seek PAC protection from any registered Connecticut PAC for a decade, he said. If something happens to them in that window, a health crisis, a housing situation, a threat from another alpha, they have no legal claim to PAC support. They're essentially unaffiliated, which in PAC law terms means they're unprotected. And the properties they sold, adjacent to three parcels that Calloway Group is developing into a private PAC compound, high wall, gated, exclusive registration, the kind of territory that becomes enormously valuable once the surrounding land is cleared of competing PAC claims. I stared at the table. They cleared the Omegas out, I said, legally, with signatures. With signatures obtained under what we believe were coercive conditions, yes. We just haven't been able to prove the coercion because the agreements look voluntary on paper, and the families are too frightened to come forward formally. Frightened of my brothers. He didn't answer that directly. He didn't have to. I picked up my cortado and took a long sip and stared at the chalkboard menu above the counter. It had a drawing of a birch tree in the corner, simple and clean, black chalk on green. I looked at it and thought about three Omega families sitting in homes that no longer had the protection of PAC law, and about Nathaniel's signature at the bottom of every page. There was another file, I said. Declan waited, with my name on it. I put the cup down. A medical report from 8 years ago, a clinic in New Haven. They assessed my psychometry, documented it, and without telling me, the silence that followed was a different quality from the earlier ones, heavier, more careful. How detailed was the report, Declan said. Something in his tone made me look at him more sharply. Detailed enough. Why? He unfolded his hands, refolded them. A tell, I was learning. He did it when he was deciding how much to say. Declan, there's a secondary element to our investigation, he said. One I didn't mention yesterday because I wasn't sure how much you knew and I didn't want to overwhelm the first conversation. Consider me ready to be overwhelmed, he exhaled. There's a record in the Connecticut PAC registry of an Omega with a documented rare ability being flagged as a high-value asset 7 years ago. The flag was placed by a PAC authority. The record is sealed, which means we can only see the outline, not the name. But the timeline and the geographic location match the Calloway territory. He looked at me steadily. And the ability listed in the flag description is psychometry. The espresso machine hissed. The couple by the window laughed at something. The birch tree on the chalkboard stayed exactly where it was. High-value asset, I said. That's the registry language, yes. Someone flagged me in the PAC registry as a high-value asset. We believe so, as in the kind of flag that other PAC authorities and interested parties can see, even with the name sealed. Yes. I put both hands flat on the table, gloved, still. So my brothers documented my ability, filed a sealed registry flag describing me as a high-value asset, and have had a security detail on me for what I'm now guessing is not actually recent. Declan said nothing, which was its own answer. How long? I said. The flag is 7 years old. 7 years. I had been 13. I had thought the gloves were my secret and my solution and my quiet little private management system for an ability nobody knew about. And for 7 years there had been a flag in the Connecticut PAC registry that told anyone who knew how to look that there was an Omega in the Calloway territory with psychometry. Anyone who knew how to look. Who else can see that flag? I said. My voice came out even. I was proud of that. PAC authorities at a senior level, registry administrators, and any party who files a formal interest petition with the registry. He paused. We found 2 interest petitions filed against the sealed record in the last 3 years, both from outside the Calloway territory, one from a PAC authority in Westchester County, one from a private entity we haven't been able to fully identify yet. I stared at him. Someone else has been trying to find out who I am, I said. Yes. And my brothers know this. Almost certainly. So the security detail, I said slowly, the pieces arranging themselves with the horrible clarity of something that had always been there waiting to be seen. Holloway, the campus perimeters, the cameras. That's not about pack politics and credible threats as a general category. No, Declan said quietly. We don't think it is. It's about me, specifically. Someone is looking for me specifically, and my brothers are trying to make sure they don't find me. That's our working theory, yes. I sat back in my chair, the mismatched chairs, the chalkboard, the birch tree, the couple finishing their muffin and pulling on their coats. The ordinary Wednesday morning in Cos Cob happening all around this table like none of this was real. I thought about something Grayson had said 2 years ago, offhand, the kind of thing that hadn't registered as significant at the time. We had been watching something on television, some procedural drama about pack crime, and there had been a scene about an Omega with a rare ability being acquired by a rival pack. Grayson had changed the channel without comment. When I asked why, he said lazy writing and handed me the remote. I had believed him. I had been believing them for 20 years. Every redirect, every smooth deflection, every almost normal dinner. I had been choosing to believe them because the alternative was this: sitting in a coffee shop in Cos Cob, being told that my existence had been flagged in a government registry and that multiple unknown parties had been trying to locate me for years, while my brothers built walls around me and called it love, which it was. That was still the most complicated part. It was love. I had not been wrong about that. The sandwiches and the oak tree and Grayson getting stuck 4 feet off the ground because he climbed up after me. That was real. That was true. And it was also true that they had made decisions about my life, my ability, my safety, and my future without asking me a single time what I wanted. Not once. Not ever. I need a minute, I said. Take whatever you need, Declan said. I got up, walked to the side hallway where the restrooms were, stood in the small corridor between the two doors, and pressed my back against the wall and looked at the ceiling. I was not going to cry in a coffee shop in Cos Cob on a Wednesday morning. I was absolutely going to cry in a coffee shop in Cos Cob on a Wednesday morning. It was not dramatic crying. It was the quiet, controlled kind that happened behind the eyes more than anywhere else. The kind that felt like pressure releasing from a place that had been holding too much for too long. 2 breaths. 3. The ceiling had a water stain in the shape of something that might have been a bird if you were in the right mood. I was not in the right mood. I wiped my eyes with the back of my gloved hand, straightened my sweatshirt, took one more breath. Then I walked back out to the table and sat down. Declan looked at me without saying anything about the 30 seconds I had just spent falling apart in his direction. Another thing I was adding to the list of things I appreciated about him. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. I want to know who filed the interest petitions. We're working on it. Work faster. I picked up my cortado. It was slightly cold now, but I drank it anyway. And I want to know what your committee can do for the 3 Omega families. Not theoretically, actually. If we can demonstrate that the waivers were signed under coercive conditions, we can petition for annulment of Section 4.7 and reinstate their PAC reassignment rights. It would also open the door for a formal investigation into Calloway Group's acquisition practices, which would be very bad for my brothers. Yes, I turned the small cup in my hands, and the photographs I took. Admissibility is complicated given how they were obtained, but they can inform the investigation's direction without being submitted directly as evidence. They help us know where to look. So I burn my relationship with my brothers for photographs that can't be used in court. Not entirely. The photographs tell us the documents exist. We can subpoena them through proper channels now that we know what we're looking for. I set the cup down. Then why did you need me at all? He was quiet for a moment. I didn't, necessarily. Not for the investigation. He looked at the table. Boy, but I thought you deserved to know what was happening in your own life, and I thought you were smart enough and strong enough to decide what to do with it once you knew. I looked at him. He looked back. His green eyes were very steady. No performance in them. No angle working behind the surface. Just a person sitting across from me in a coffee shop telling me something that cost him nothing to say and possibly everything to mean. That's either very noble, I said slowly, or you feel guilty about something. He did not look away. Both, he said. My lead investigator, the one who transferred out of state. That was my fault. I pushed him toward the Calloway territory too fast and without enough cover. Nathaniel found out, and I don't know exactly what was said, but whatever it was, it worked. He exhaled. I've been more careful since then, but careful didn't feel like enough. So I'm the next approach. You're not an approach, he said. You're the person most affected by all of this who has the least information about it. That's not strategy. That's just wrong. I sat with that. The coffee shop continued around us, warm and ordinary, and smelling of good espresso and someone's blueberry scone. If I help you, I said carefully, if, hypothetically, my ability gives me access to information that standard investigation methods can't reach. Objects hold memories. I can read them. That is potentially very useful to a PAC oversight investigation, and we both know it. Declan did not deny it. Good. I would have liked him less if he had. That would put you at risk, he said. One especially given the registry flag and the interest petitions. If anyone connected to those petitions found out you were actively assisting an investigation into the Calloway PAC, you would become a much more visible target. I'm already a target, I said. I've apparently been one since I was 13. The difference is that until this morning, I didn't know it. I looked at him directly. I would rather be a target who knows she is one than a protected object who doesn't. I caught myself. Who knows he is one? I corrected. Old habit. Hated it. Declan nodded without making it a thing, which I appreciated. The side door of the coffee shop opened briefly, letting in a slice of cold November air that moved across the room and then was gone. I thought about Nathaniel running his route, about Grayson's rosemary chicken and his two careful silences, about a sealed registry flag and two unknown petitions, and a 12-year-old boy sitting in a clinic in New Haven, not knowing he was being documented. I thought about 3 Omega families with 10-year waivers and no PAC to return to. I made a decision, not loudly, not dramatically, the way I made most of my real decisions, quietly in the space between one breath and the next, where the noise dropped away and only the truth was left. I'll help you, I said, on my terms, my pace. And if at any point I decide the risk to those 3 families or to myself outweighs the benefit, I stop. No argument. Agreed, Declan said immediately. And you tell me everything your committee knows. No managing my information, no deciding what I can handle. On everything. Agreed. And you stop sitting next to me in seminar like it's subtle. It is not subtle. Aldridge has already noticed, and he is going to start asking questions about collaborative learning initiatives, and I cannot survive that conversation. Declan looked at me for a half second, then he laughed. A real one. Unexpected, a little surprised at itself, the kind that changed his whole face. It was, objectively, a good laugh. I stored that information in a completely neutral and professional part of my brain and moved on. Deal, he said. I stood, put on my jacket, picked up my bag. Send me whatever you have on the Westchester petition, I said, and the unidentified one. I want to see the filing dates and any associated names. I'll have it to you by tonight. I nodded, moved toward the door. I stopped with my hand on the frame, cold glass under my gloved palm. Declan. Yeah. If my brothers find out about this before I'm ready to tell them myself. I didn't finish the sentence all the way. I didn't need to. He understood. They won't hear it from me. I pushed open the door and walked out into the cold Connecticut morning. The street was quiet. A delivery truck idled at the corner. The bookshop next door had finally changed its window display. Apparently, there was a new arrangement of titles that I couldn't read from here. So then I walked to the corner and stood waiting for the crosswalk signal and thought about the fact that I had just agreed to assist a PAC oversight investigation into my own brothers using a psychic ability they had secretly documented when I was 12 and filed in a government registry without my knowledge. The light changed. I crossed the street. There were going to be consequences to this, large ones, the kind that rearranged things permanently. I knew that. I was walking into them with my eyes open and my gloves on, and the photographs of 3 Omega families' suppression contracts sitting in my phone camera roll. For the first time since yesterday morning in seminar, I felt something that was not dread or confusion or the specific grief of discovering that love and control can wear each other's faces. I felt clear. Frightened, yes. And clear, yes. Both at once. I pulled out my phone and texted Grayson, going to the library, back by dinner. He responded in 30 seconds with a thumbs up and then, after a pause, a second message. We have food here. Don't skip lunch. I stared at that message for a long moment. Then I put my phone in my pocket and kept walking. I did not go to the library. I walked for 40 minutes instead, through the side streets of Cos Cob, and then along the water where the November wind came off the sounds sharp and specific, the kind of cold that clarified things. I had my hands in my pockets and my gloves on, and I walked until my ears hurt and my thoughts stopped overlapping each other and started filing themselves into something manageable. What I knew, 3 Omega families, Section 4.7, a sealed registry flag 7 years old. Two interest petitions from outside the territory, a medical report with my name on it and Nathaniel's signature at the bottom. What I did not know, who filed the petitions, what they wanted, how much danger I was actually in versus how much my brothers had decided I was in, which historically had been two different numbers. What I could not stop thinking about, Grayson's text. Don't skip lunch. The specific, ordinary tenderness of it sitting right next to everything else like it belonged there. Like he could love me completely and still have kept all of this from me for years without ever losing a night of sleep over the contradiction. Maybe he had lost sleep. I didn't know. That was the problem. I had stopped knowing which parts of them were performance and which were real. And the terrible thing about people who loved you and lied to you simultaneously was that it was never entirely one or the other. It was always both, layered together so completely you couldn't separate them without tearing something. I stopped at a bench near the water and sat down. A seagull landed 3 feet away, looked at me with the specific contempt of an animal that had never once been told what to do, and then left. I envied it briefly. My phone buzzed. Declan. Sent you the petition files. Westchester 1 first. Look at the filing entity name on the second petition. I opened the files. The Westchester petition was filed by a PAC authority named Harmon Cross. Senior Alpha, registered Connecticut adjacent territory. The name meant nothing to me directly, but the territory rang something faint and distant, on a name I had heard once in a psychometric flash from one of Nathaniel's objects, attached to the feeling of hostility. I moved to the second petition. The filing entity was not a person, it was a company name. 3 words that sat on the screen looking perfectly ordinary and hit me like stepping off a curb I hadn't seen. Calloway Legacy Holdings. I read it twice, 3 times. Calloway Legacy Holdings was not Calloway Group. Calloway Group was Nathaniel's company, the one I knew, the one with the real estate arm and the private security division, and the 3 shell subsidiaries I had found out about at 15 via a briefcase handle. Calloway Legacy Holdings was a name I had never heard, not once, in 20 years. But it was our name. So someone using our family name had filed a petition to access the sealed registry record of an Omega with psychometry in the Calloway territory. I sat on the bench in the cold and stared at the water and thought about what that meant for a long time. It could be Nathaniel filing under a secondary entity to monitor his own registry flag, controlling the information landscape the way he controlled everything else. It could be Grayson. It could be someone who had no right to the Calloway name using it as camouflage. It could be something I had not thought of yet, which historically was where the worst things lived. I texted Declan, "Who is the registered agent for Calloway Legacy Holdings?" His response took 6 minutes. Still pulling? "It's a Delaware LLC, shell registered through a nominee service. It'll take time." "How much time?" "A few days minimum. I'm working on it." I put my phone away. The seagull came back, looked at me again, left again. We were developing a dynamic. I stood up, turned away from the water, and started walking home. The estate looked the same as it always did. That was the thing I kept coming back to. Nothing had changed on the outside. The iron gate, the gravel driveway, the old oak at the property line, the house itself solid and unchanged and exactly where it had always been. I had changed. That was the asymmetry. The house was the same, and I was different, and walking back into it felt like putting on a coat that no longer fit correctly. I went in through the side entrance, which opened into the mudroom off the kitchen. Quieter entry. Grayson was at the kitchen counter when I came through, and making something that involved a lot of knife work on vegetables, which was his secondary stress activity after full recipe cooking. He looked up. Library close early. Decided to walk instead, I said. Cold but good. There's soup on the stove, he said. From last night's stock. Thanks. I poured myself a bowl without taking my jacket off, stood at the counter and ate it slowly, and watched Grayson chop carrots with the focused precision of a man who was absolutely thinking about something other than carrots. We existed in that kitchen silence for a while. It was usually a comfortable silence. We were good at those. Today it had a texture to it, faint but present, like static just below the frequency where you could hear it clearly. Gray, I said. Who is Calloway Legacy Holdings? The knife stopped. Not dramatically, just stopped. A clean halt in the middle of a carrot, blade resting on the cutting board. Grayson did not turn around immediately. He set the knife down carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have done something your brain didn't authorize. And then he turned. His face was doing something I had not seen it do before. Not the business face, not the charming face, not the brother face. Something underneath all of those. Something that looked, if I was reading it correctly, like a man whose calculation had just come up with a number he had not prepared for. Where did you hear that name? He said. Does it matter? Eli. Grayson. I set the soup bowl down. Who is Calloway Legacy Holdings? And why did they file a petition to access a sealed PAC registry record that I'm fairly certain is mine? The kitchen was very quiet. The soup stock on the stove made a small sound. The heating vent clicked. Outside the window, the late afternoon had gone the flat gray of a Connecticut November sky with all its color spent. Sit down, Grayson said. I'm fine standing. Please. And there it was. The thing under the charm. The thing under the performance. Honest and tired and slightly afraid. Please sit down. I sat. He pulled out the stool across from me and sat too, which Grayson almost never did at the kitchen island because he was a person who processed things in motion. The fact that he sat told me this was going to be a different kind of conversation than any we had managed to have yet. Hey, he folded his hands on the counter, unfolded them. The tell I had learned to read in Declan, I had apparently been watching in Grayson my whole life without registering it as a tell because it had always just been him. Calloway Legacy Holdings is Nathaniel's, he said, a secondary entity he set up 6 years ago, separately from the group. Why? Because the group operates under PAC oversight jurisdiction. Legacy Holdings doesn't. It's structured to be outside the standard registry accountability framework. I looked at my brother. Grayson, that is a very clean explanation for something that sounds like it was specifically designed to avoid scrutiny. He looked at the counter. Yes. Why did it file a petition on my sealed record? To monitor it, he said it quietly, to make sure no one else was accessing it. Every time another party filed a petition to view the record, Legacy Holdings would be notified. It was a surveillance mechanism, not for the record itself, but for who was trying to reach it. I sat with that. So Nathaniel built a shell company specifically to watch who was watching me. Yes, without telling me I was being watched at all. Grayson was quiet. How long has Nathaniel known about the other petitions? I said. Since the first one filed, 3 years ago. 3 years. Harmon Cross from Westchester had been trying to locate me through the registry for 3 years, and my brothers had known and had said nothing. Had expanded the security detail and confirmed perimeters, and redirected my questions over dinner and said nothing. Who is Harmon Cross? I said. Grayson's expression shifted. Something harder moved behind his eyes. A PAC authority in Westchester who has a specific interest in rare Omega abilities. He collects them, is the most honest way to put it. Omegas with documented powers who end up in his territory tend to stay there under conditions that don't look like choice from the outside. The word collect landed in my stomach like a stone in still water. And he's been trying to find out if the sealed record is me? I said. Yes. For 3 years. Yes. I pressed both gloved hands flat on the counter and breathed evenly and looked at my brother, who was sitting across from me with his hands finally still and his face open in a way that Grayson's face almost never was. And I understood in that moment that this was what the love looked like from inside the lie. It looked like fear, specific and genuine and 3 years old. I need you to tell me everything, I said. Not the version where you decide what I can handle. Everything. Starting with what you both know about Cross and ending with whatever it is you still haven't said. Grayson looked at me for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You should hear this from Nathaniel too. He needs to be here for this conversation." "Then call him," I said. "Right now. Call him and tell him to come home because his little brother just spent the morning finding out that his entire sense of safety was a managed construction, and I am done being managed." Something moved across Grayson's face. Not guilt, exactly. Something closer to recognition. Like a word he had been waiting to hear for a long time had finally been said out loud. He picked up his phone. He called Nathaniel, and I sat at the kitchen island in my jacket with my cold soup and my gloves on and waited for the conversation that should have happened years ago to finally, irreversibly begin. Nathaniel came home in 11 minutes. I knew because I counted. Not obsessively. Just the way you count things when sitting still is the only option available, and your brain needs somewhere to put its energy. The soup went fully cold. Grayson made coffee without asking if I wanted any and set a mug in front of me anyway, which was either brotherly instinct or a peace offering or both. I wrapped my hands around it and waited. The front door opened. Footsteps in the hallway. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway still in his coat, which meant he had not stopped to do anything between Grayson's call and walking back into this house. His eyes went to me first, then to Grayson, then back to me. He read the room in the under 3 seconds. Nathaniel had always been fast at that. He came in, sat at the island without taking his coat off, set his keys on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when you need your hands to behave. "You found the cabinet," he said. "I found the cabinet," I said, "and the file with your name." "And the file with my name." He exhaled through his nose, slow and controlled. "How much do you know?" "Enough to have had a very informative morning," I said. "Enough to know about Legacy Holdings and Harmon Cross, and the 3 years you both spent confirming perimeters instead of having a single honest conversation with me." I looked at him directly. "So here is what is going to happen right now. Watch, you are going to tell me everything. The real version. No redirects, no managed information, no deciding what I can handle." I paused. "I am 20 years old. I have been managing myself since I was 12 without knowing I had backup. I can handle the truth." The kitchen held that for a moment. Then Nathaniel said, "Yes, you can." And something in his voice was different. The measured quality was still there, but underneath it, something had shifted, like a wall that had been standing so long it had forgotten it was a wall until someone leaned on it and it moved. "You always could. That was never the question." "Then what was?" I said. He looked at his keys on the counter. "Whether telling you would make you a target before we had enough in place to protect you from what that meant. And instead, you made me a managed object in a registry while 2 separate parties filed petitions to locate me. We were monitoring both petitions. Cross never got close enough to confirm your identity." "That is not the point, Nathaniel." "I know." He said it quietly. "I know that's not the point." Grayson set his coffee down. We were scared. He said it simply, the way Grayson said things when he had decided to stop being careful with them. "We found out about your ability when you were 12 because you touched the wrong thing at the wrong time, and Mom saw it happen before she died." She told Nathaniel. "He took you to the clinic because he needed to understand what it was and whether it could be suppressed or hidden. Not to document it for control, because he was 20 and you were 12, and someone had just handed him the information that his little brother had a rare ability that PAC law classified as a high-value asset, and he was terrified." The word Mom sat in the room with us. She had been gone since I was 13, 1 year after the clinic. I had not known she was the one who told Nathaniel. I had not known she had seen it happen. Something rearranged in my chest, not painlessly. "She knew," I said. "She's the one who noticed," Nathaniel said. "She made me promise to keep it quiet, to keep you safe, to not let the registry or any outside PAC authority turn it into something they could use." His jaw worked. "The flag in the registry was a mistake. A junior administrator at the clinic filed a standard report before I could stop it. By the time I found out, it was already sealed and already visible to senior PAC authorities. I set up Legacy Holdings to watch it because pulling the flag entirely would have drawn more attention than leaving it. You should have told me, I said. Yes, he said. We should have. Years ago. Yes. That is not a small thing to admit. No, he said. It isn't. We looked at each other across the kitchen island. My two brothers and me, and the ghost of a promise made to a woman who had been gone for 7 years, and the weight of everything that promise had cost all three of us in different ways. I was still angry. I want to be clear about that. The anger was real, and it was not going anywhere immediately, and it was not required to. But underneath it, running alongside it, was something else. The recognition that fear and love wore each other's faces in this family and had for a long time, and that the damage done was genuine, but so was the reason for it. Neither of those things canceled the other out. Both of them were true at once. Harmon Cross, I said. What does he actually want with me? Nathaniel's expression hardened. He runs a private compound in Westchester under the cover of a therapeutic retreat for omegas with rare abilities. On paper, it's a wellness facility. In practice, it's a controlled environment where omegas with documented powers are kept under long-term PAC authority contracts that are difficult to exit. He has 6 omegas currently registered to his territory. None of them have left in 4 years. The word kept settled over me, cold and specific. The PAC Oversight Committee is investigating him, I said. Nathaniel looked at me sharply. How do you know about the committee? Because I spent yesterday talking to one of their investigators, I said. Because I had already figured out that something was wrong before this morning, and I went looking for information the way any person would when the people they trusted had decided truth was optional. Grayson made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything else. Nathaniel stared at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It took me a moment to identify it. Pride, reluctant, complicated, slightly pained pride. You went to the committee, he said. The committee came to me first, technically, I said. I just didn't run from it. Eli, he leaned forward. Pretty know if Cross finds out you're connected to that investigation, he will escalate. He has resources and he has PAC authority contacts, and he has been building a case for accessing your registry record for 3 years. Then we finish this before he gets the chance, I said. The committee needs documentation of his practices. I can help with that. My ability can access information through objects that standard investigation cannot reach. You know that. You've known it since I was 12. I held his gaze. Stop protecting me from the thing that makes me useful and start working with me instead. The silence that followed was long. Then Grayson said softly, He sounds like Mom. Nathaniel looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes, that specific grief that never fully left either of them when she came up. Asked him beneath it, something releasing. A held breath finally let go. What does the committee need, he said. And just like that, the wall came down. What followed was 2 hours at the kitchen island with cold coffee and Nathaniel's laptop, and Grayson on the phone with a legal contact he trusted, and me in the middle of it all, gloves off for the first time in that house in a way that felt chosen rather than accidental. Nathaniel called his own attorney and disclosed Legacy Holdings voluntarily to a committee liaison, which made the entity legitimate rather than evasive, and opened it as a formal monitoring asset for the Cross investigation. Grayson pulled 3 years of petition access logs that Legacy Holdings had been quietly collecting. Every time Cross or his associates had touched the registry record, time-stamped and documented. I texted Declan. My brothers are cooperating. Call your committee lead tonight. His response came fast. Eli, are you serious? I am extremely serious. Also, your lead investigator should come back from wherever he transferred to. I have a feeling we're going to need him. A longer pause. Then, how did you do this in 48 hours? I grew up in this house, I typed back. I know where everything is. By the time the kitchen light had shifted to the flat gold of late afternoon, the outline of something real had taken shape. Not a complete solution, not an overnight fix. The 3 Omega families would need legal representation for the Section 4.7 annulment process, which Nathaniel agreed to fund without being asked. which was either genuine conscience or strategic self-preservation, and I was willing to accept either as long as the result was the same. Cross's petition access logs gave the committee a paper trail that corroborated their existing investigation with documented timestamps. It was not everything, but it was enough to move. At some point, Grayson made more food because Grayson processed things through cooking, and this had been a significant amount of things to process. He made pasta this time, simple with olive oil and garlic and the good Parmesan he kept on the top shelf for occasions that merited it. We ate at the kitchen island instead of the dining room table. No candles, no performance of normal. Just three people eating pasta at a counter with laptops open and the specific exhausted quiet of people who had stopped pretending. I want you to tell me thing, I said at some point, with a forkful of pasta halfway to my mouth. Going forward, not everything. I understand that some of what you do lives in a category I don't need full access to, but the things that affect my life directly, my ability, my safety, my name in a registry. I looked at both of them. Those are mine. I get to know those. Yes, Nathaniel said. Not a negotiation. That's the condition. I know, he said. Yes. I looked at Grayson. Obviously, yes, Grayson said. I have felt terrible about this for 3 years. Do you know what it's like to feel terrible about something for 3 years while also being unable to say anything about it? It's awful. I have aged internally. You look fine, I said. I look fine on the outside. On the inside, I am ancient. Grayson, Eli, thank you, I said. Both of you, for the parts that were real. I set my fork down. And I need you to know that I understand why. I don't agree with how, but I understand why. Nathaniel looked at me. His jaw did the thing, but softer this time. That's more grace than we earned. Probably, I said. Consider it a running tab. He almost smiled. A real one. The rare kind that reached his eyes and stayed there for a moment before he remembered he was Nathaniel Calloway and recomposed himself. Grayson did not recompose himself. He reached across the counter and put his hand briefly over mine, gloved and warm, and squeezed once and let go. No words. Just that. It was enough. Later that night, I sat in the window seat. Same spot, same navy cushion, same bare oak tree in the front yard visible through the glass. But the lockbox under the cushion felt different now. Not because anything in it had changed, but because the reason I had put it there had. I had built that emergency kit for a version of my life where I might need to run. I did not think I needed to run anymore. What I needed was something different and harder and better. I needed to stay with my eyes open this time and help fix what was broken and learn how to be known by the people who loved me instead of protected from the cost of being known. I took my gloves off and held them in my lap, my hands bare in the window seat light. The thing I hid most carefully, the thing that made me different and useful and for a long time frightened. I pressed one bare palm against the cold glass of the window. When the oak tree outside had no emotional residue to give me. Trees didn't hold memories the way objects did, the way people did. They just stood there growing slowly in the dark, doing the one thing they were built to do without apology or explanation. I sat there for a while, just me and the glass and the dark yard and the oak. My phone buzzed. Declan. Committee lead is back on the case. Formally. Cross is going to have a very bad December. Me. Good. Declan. You doing okay? I thought about the question. Really thought about it, which was not something I did enough. Me. Getting there. Ask me again in a week. Declan. I'll be in Tuesday's seminar if you want someone to, not so subtly, sit near you. Me. That is the worst offer I have ever received, and I will see you Tuesday. Now I put my phone face down on the cushion and looked out at the dark yard and thought about 3 Omega families who would have their pack rights back by spring if the annulment held. About a sealed registry flag that was about to become evidence in a real investigation. About a man in Westchester who had been collecting people like objects and was about to find out what happened when one of those objects turned out to have teeth. I thought about my mother seeing it happen when I was 12, watching me touch something and go somewhere else for a few seconds and coming back changed. I thought about what she must have felt in that moment. Fear, yes, but also maybe something like recognition. The specific feeling of watching someone you love be exactly who they are. I hope so. I like to think so. The heating vent clicked, and the house settled around me. Old wood and warm air, and the smell of Grayson's pasta still drifting up from the kitchen. I put my gloves back on, not because I had to, not because I was hiding, just because it was cold and I was comfortable, and some habits were neutral enough to keep. Tomorrow there would be more to do, more to untangle. The cross investigation was a process, not a moment, and my brothers had a lot of trust to rebuild one honest conversation at a time, and none of that was going to be simple or fast or painless. But tonight the house was warm, and my brothers were downstairs, and somewhere in Cos Cob, a law student with a coffee-stained jacket was telling his committee lead to come back from wherever he had gone. Tonight was enough. Tonight I knew where I was and who I was and what my hands could do. And that was more than I had known 3 days ago. It was a start. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you'll definitely love the next one. It's even crazier and more intriguing than you can imagine. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. The next story drops soon.